howling storm battered the red keep through the night, rain lashing the scorched stone, thunder rattling battered windows, and lightning illuminating the half-reconstructed towers in stark, flickering light. Dawn arrived like a tired sigh, filtering weak gray light through damp clouds over King's Landing. The courtyard puddles shone dully, and the city stirred beneath a thin haze of drizzle. Workers emerged from ramshackle tents or half-repaired barracks, yawning and stretching, preparing to resume their daily labors of rebuilding. Within the keep's newly fortified wing, Daenerys Targaryen awoke to the sound of distant hammers and shouted orders echoing through corridors. Though she had slept poorly, she rose immediately from the narrow bed and dressed in a fur-lined cloak against the chill that still clung to the rain-swept halls. The events of recent days weighed heavily on her. Tyrion's perilous mission to Casterly Rock, his wound from those runic-forged blades, the presence of the Red Priestess Zahara in the city, and the swirl of conspiracies that threatened their delicate rule. But there was no time for self-pity. The realm did not pause for rulers to gather their strength. She slipped from her chamber, footfalls soft on damp stone, and navigated a hallway of newly placed torches, the flames sputtering in the residual dampness. At an intersection, two unsullied guards snapped to attention. She returned their respectful nod and continued until she reached a small antechamber that had become her informal solar. There, she found Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, already standing by a narrow window overlooking the muddy courtyard. Ghost dozed at his feet, muzzle on paws, ears twitching. Jon wore a somber expression. Dark smudges beneath his eyes betrayed his own lack of restful sleep. When he saw Daenerys, a faint, weary smile crossed his lips. He inclined his head. "Morning," he said, "if it can be called that. Feels like the storm just traded its thunder for a drizzle." She nodded, drawing her cloak tighter. "A dull morning, but we'll take dull if it means no new attempts on anyone's life overnight." A short pause, then she added grimly, "Though I doubt that quiet will hold. Lady Nemella wants justice for her wounded guard. The Watchers turned up more contraband near Flea Bottom, and we still have that Red Priestess to worry about." Jon exhaled. "I'd prefer a crisis at midday over a crisis at dawn." He glanced at a small stack of parchments on a side table. Messages arrived from the harbor. "Our Watchers have found at least 2 vessels from Bravos that might be connected to the priestess's retinue, bearing more red-robed acolytes, or so rumor says. Zahara denies summoning reinforcements, but some suspect she's building a presence in the city." Daenerys's gaze hardened. "She told us she'd remain near the harbor, that she brought only a handful. If it grows into a larger flock of Lawler worshippers, the city may see them as a cult. We cannot allow a fanatic movement to destabilize us. I want them watched carefully, but discreetly so we don't incite them." Jon nodded, raking a hand through his dark hair. "Agreed. For now, we handle the day's tasks. We might set aside time to speak with her again. If she truly has knowledge of Euron's doings in Essos, we need to learn more." A soft knock at the doorframe interrupted them. Ser Ryman Celtigar shuffled in, leaning on a cane, his age showing more each day. He bowed. "Your Graces, apologies for the early intrusion. A messenger from the Great September District begs your audience. Something about a confrontation between a group of Lannister loyalists and the Red Priests. No one dead, apparently, but quite a commotion." Jon grimaced. "It begins. Send the messenger in." Moments later, a young man in mud-splattered clothes stumbled into the chamber, breathless. He bowed with frantic haste. "Your Graces, thank you. I'm Edward, from the City Watch. We need guidance." At dawn, a handful of men wearing lion sigils, some old Lannister surcoats, clashed with 3 Red Priests chanting in the square near the Great September. The priests were calling on people to embrace the Queen of Light and her black dragon, or something like that. The Lannister men took offense. No weapons drawn beyond fists, but it threatened to turn ugly until the Watch intervened. "We've detained 1 Lannister man and 1 Red Priest. The rest fled." Daenerys's eyes flared with irritation. "They clashed in the open, in broad daylight, over a sermon." "Yes, Your Grace," Edward said. The priests started chanting that Daenerys Targaryen banished darkness once before and will do so again. The Lannister men hurled insults about Targaryens being usurpers. Then fists flew. Jon rubbed the bridge of his nose. We can't have open brawls every time a red priest wants to call me or Daenerys some prophesied figure. The city is tinder. More fights like this and it'll ignite. Daenerys inhaled slowly. Thank you, Edward. We'll see to it. Release the 2 detainees to the Watch's main hold for now. We'll determine if charges are needed. Then ensure Watch patrols around the Great September District to keep these groups apart until further notice. Edward bowed deeply. Yes, Your Grace. Right away. He hurried out, leaving them to brood over the news. Ser Ryman lingered. I'll make sure the Watch receives your orders, my queen. Also, we have an audience scheduled in an hour with Lady Nymella about her wounded guard. The man still hasn't regained full consciousness, but the maester says he's slightly improved. Daenerys gave a terse nod. That is something, at least. One more matter for the day's burden. Thank you, Ser Ryman. He bowed once more and departed. Daenerys turned to Jon. We could easily lose control if these priestly factions keep proclaiming us divine saviors. Let's speak with Zahara after we handle Nymella's concerns. We'll tell her plainly to rein in her disciples. We can't have them stirring fights. She might claim it's beyond her control, but we must try. Jon agreed. Yes, let's handle that. Then we can see how Tyrion is faring. He's still convalescing. The maester said the burn on his leg is healing, but slowly. At the mention of Tyrion's wound, Daenerys' shoulders drooped slightly. The runic cut he'd received from those strange blades in the Westerlands was more than a normal sword slash. It left an odd discoloration around the edges, as if the flesh was slow to knit. The maester had tried poultices of rare herbs. Tyrion bore the pain stoically, but Daenerys worried about what it implied for the enemies they faced. She pushed the thought away and gestured for Jon to join her. Let's go. We have a day to shape. They made their way through the keep's corridors to a makeshift audience chamber. Though it was no grand throne room, it had been cleaned of debris, with a dais constructed from leftover timbers and a series of seats placed in front. As they entered, a small cluster of petitioners already awaited. The musty smell of damp stone and old plaster hung in the air. Shortly after they took their seats, Lady Nymella arrived with 2 Dornish guards in tow. Her face was drawn with fatigue, and she wore a loose-fitting gown of rich orange and gold. She offered a curt bow but forwent any pleasantries. My guard still hovers near death, she said, voice laced with suppressed anger. Your maesters do what they can, yet he does not awaken. Meanwhile, the man who attacked him rots in your cells. Am I to understand his trial is still pending? Daenerys' tone was even. It is. We did not want to rush proceedings while your guard's condition was uncertain. Our law calls for a hearing, evidence from both sides, and if your man recovers enough to provide a statement, that changes how we proceed. If he does not, she paused. We'll weigh the attacker's confession and the watcher's testimony. Justice will be served. Lady Nymella's eyes flashed. A swift justice, I hope. If he dies, there can be no doubt the attacker must die too. Jon stepped in. That's likely, but we must ensure it's done properly, so no one claims we rushed the verdict to appease or punish. You don't want the city seeing this as a foreign power pressuring the crown. Let the trial follow due process. She inhaled slowly, as if trying to master her frustration. I understand, but resentment grows among my companions. They fear more attacks. The memory of Lannister cruelty is fresh in our minds. Daenerys gave a solemn nod. We have watchers patrolling. If any further violence is done against your people, it will be met with stern punishment. Nymella pursed her lips. Very well. Another matter, Your Grace. We have word from Dorne that some lords question the sincerity of your promises. They ask whether the monarchy truly supports a re-establishment of Dornish autonomy in local governance. They want me to return with a formal treaty acknowledging Dorne's special status. Are you prepared to sign such a thing? A small knot of tension formed in Daenerys' chest. She glanced at Jon. He gave her a brief nod to proceed. We are prepared to formalize what we discussed. Dorne's right to manage its internal affairs without heavy-handed interference. That does not mean complete independence, nor refusal to pay any crown taxes, but a recognition that Dorne's traditions will be respected. She spoke carefully, aware the entire realm might watch how she handled Dorne. We can draft a document acknowledging these mutual terms, in line with how Dorne was historically treated under the Targaryens after they joined the realm willingly. Namella inclined her head. That's what I hope to hear. Then we can proceed with the next step. I will have my scribe prepare a draft. Thank you, Your Grace. Though she remained stiff, there was a hint of relief in her voice. And as soon as my guard's fate is clear, I'd like to see justice done. We can only remain here so long. Daenerys rose from her seat, signaling the end of the meeting. Thank you, Lady Namella. We'll do what we can. The maesters are skilled. Your man has a chance. The Dornish delegation departed, leaving Daenerys and Jon to handle smaller petitions. Disputes over trade caravans, missing persons in Flea Bottom, rumors of a food shortage in a southwestern district. By midday, the litany of problems felt endless, but they pressed on. Lunch was a hasty affair of bread and stew brought to them by a squire. Rain continued to patter outside, a steady dull roar upon slate roofs and canvas tarps. The day felt confined, colorless, to keep an island of tension in a sea of uneasy calm. When they finally emerged, the corridor was lit with flickering lanterns. Ser Davos had not yet returned from the Reach, so no new tidings on grain shipments. Gendry was busy establishing Storm's End's new defenses. Tormund had gone out with a small search party to track contraband in the city's outskirts. Tyrion remained abed with the maester, though stable enough to do a bit of reading and to receive visitors. Exhausted, Daenerys paused to rest in a narrow courtyard. She breathed the damp air, letting the drizzle cool her face. Jon stood beside her, arms crossed. After a moment, he murmured, "We need to speak with Zahara soon. The brawl near the Great September can't go unanswered." Daenerys nodded. "Yes, let's do it now, while we have a break from the line of petitioners." She waved over an unsullied guard. "Fetch the Red Priestess Zahara, if she's still in the harbor. Tell her the Queen and King request her presence." The guard bowed and hurried off. Daenerys and Jon exchanged tense looks, uncertain how the Red Priestess would respond. If she was truly a messenger of prophecy, perhaps she'd comply. If she had hidden designs, she might refuse. Still, Daenerys was determined to keep her realm from plunging into another fanatical uprising. They waited in a smaller audience chamber close to the keep's main entrance. The room's walls were bare stone, the floor scattered with rushes that had grown damp from the leaky roof. A single brazier provided some warmth, though the air remained chilly. Grey Worms stood guard with 4 unsullied. They had stationed themselves at intervals, spears upright, disciplined. At last, a soft shuffle of robes signaled Zahara's arrival. She entered alone, wearing a deep red cloak embroidered with flame motifs. Water dripped from the edges of her hood. She bowed, revealing her smooth, dusky face and dark, knowing eyes. A small amulet of R'hllor glinted at her throat, a red gem that seemed to catch and hold the brazier's light. "You summoned me, Your Graces," she said in her low, resonant voice. "I come without my acolytes, as a sign of respect." Jon inclined his head. "We appreciate that. Please stand." Zahara rose. Daenerys took a breath, gesturing for her to speak with them at the center of the chamber. "We hear your followers, or at least men wearing red robes, have been preaching in the city. This morning there was nearly a riot. We cannot allow open brawls. We need you to curb your disciples. If they wish to speak of faith, let them do so without provocation or condemnation of others." Zahara's expression was solemn. "My queen, I regret the confrontation. I have counseled my brethren to show restraint. Yet the city is rife with tensions. Some men despise the Targaryen name, while others revere it as fulfillment of prophecy. My priests do not start these fights, but they do speak passionately of your role in ending the long night and your new purpose to banish all darkness. That can inflame those who resent you, I will do more to ensure they avoid direct confrontation. Jon's voice carried a hint of frustration. We do not want them praising or condemning on street corners if it leads to violence. This realm has had enough conflict. If your faith thrives, so be it, but do not recruit or incite hostility. We rule people of many beliefs, from the seven to the old gods to the drowned god. We cannot show favoritism toward one creed. Zahara nodded slowly. Understood. Yet the Lord of Light does not choose passivity in the face of the world's perils. We do not seek to overshadow other faiths, but we must warn the people of the threat across the sea. Euron's alliances, the black sorcery stirring in distant lands. They deserve to know. If men are frightened, some may turn to violence. Daenerys pressed her lips together. Spread your warnings in a calmer manner. We'll announce in the squares that if the Red Priests wish to share news of foreign dangers, they must do so through official gatherings or written postings, not by shouting in the street. That might reduce the chance of brawls. Zahara bowed her head. I will comply, Your Grace. May it bring peace rather than strife. A heartbeat of silence passed before Daenerys ventured. As for this threat you speak of, Euron's new alliances with so-called sorcerers from the east, do you have more specifics? Our men found unusual runed blades in the Westerlands. Tyrion Lannister was wounded by one and suffers a slow healing. Are these the weapons of your rumored black sorcery? Zahara's eyes flicked with concern. Likely so. Through the flames, I glimpsed forging circles in remote corners of Sithorios and the Shadowlands, where metal is folded with blood, carved with glyphs that channel old powers. If these runes are truly of that origin, it means the men wielding them have ties to a cult that worships chaotic spirits. They once sought to bind dragons or other monstrous creatures to their will. Jon's jaw tightened. Dragons? You suspect they aim to capture or kill Umbrax, or perhaps Drogon or Rhaegal? Zahara's voice wavered with warning. Yes, the black dragon you awakened resonates with the deepest veins of magic. Some in Essos would see that power harnessed. If Euron has made contact with them, they may have promised him dominion of seas and storms if he provides them with the means to break your monarchy, be it your life or the life of your dragon. In the flames, I saw glimpses of a warped crow upon the waves, crowned by swirling shapes. Whether that is Euron, I cannot be certain. Daenerys shivered. The notion that Umbrax might be targeted by those who twisted ancient spells unsettled her deeply. You said we might face a new doom if we leave these threats unchecked. Do you propose we march across the sea to root them out? Zahara lifted her chin. Not yet, for your rule is young, your realm precarious. Fighting a war in distant lands would only open your flank to internal rebellion. My counsel is caution. Watch for infiltration. Strengthen your watchers. Let me attune to the flames from here or from Dragonstone, so we may detect if the cult attempts a crossing. If they come to Westeros with their black runes, you will need your dragons and all your might to repel them. Jon and Daenerys exchanged worried looks. Zahara's logic aligned with their own constraints. They could not simply dispatch an army to Essos while the Westerlands teetered on rebellion, and the Crownlands still seethed with tension. Jon spoke quietly. Very well, we accept your watchful presence, for now. But you must keep your priests from stirring chaos in King's Landing. If your presence here leads only to more violence, we'll order you out. Zahara nodded, the gem at her throat shimmering. I understand. I will do as you ask. The Lord of Light's path is rarely gentle, but we can choose how we walk it. She bowed with surprising humility. If you have further questions, you know where to find me. With that, she turned and departed. The Unsullied parted to let her pass. Daenerys and Jon remained in the gloom, each mulling over the priestess's words. Grey Worm approached, clearing his throat. She did not deny the potential threat. She offered cooperation for now, he observed. Should we trust her? Daenerys sighed. Trust is too strong a word. We'll tolerate her presence, so long as she doesn't incite fanaticism. Jon gazed at the damp stone floor. These are uncertain times. We'll keep an eye on everything. That's all we can do. The next few days settled into a tense pattern. The Watchers tightened security in King's Landing. The City Watch patrolled squares where Red Priests preached, ensuring no brawls erupted with Lannister loyalists. Tyrion recovered slowly, though he needed a cane to walk. He spent hours conferring with the monarchy from a cushioned chair near the dais, wincing whenever his leg twinged. Despite the pain, his wit remained intact. Lady Nymella's guard, Jon, in turn, stepped to Umbrax's side, resting a hand on the black scales. The dragon let out a low rumble, thick smoke curling from its nostrils. Despite the ominous warnings about Umbrax's significance to dark sorcerers, the bond between Jon and the ancient beast was a comfort. Umbrax, for his part, seemed content, though he frequently scanned the horizon as if expecting some distant threat. Daenerys watched from a short distance. "He's wary," she noted, "as if he senses something. Maybe that's just my imagination." Jon shook his head. Umbrax was always more perceptive than the others. In Valyria, I felt as though he listened to the world around him in ways we can't understand. He ran his palm along a ridge of scales. If Euron or these sorcerers truly want him, they'll have a hell of a time trying. Daenerys managed a small, grim smile. Yes, they'd face all 3 dragons plus our forces. Still, I hate the thought of waiting passively. I'm used to acting swiftly. Jon's expression grew somber. Sometimes a strategic wait is best. Our realm is not stable enough to fight a foreign war. But if they bring the fight to us, we respond with fire and blood. He paused, glancing at Drogon, who crouched near Daenerys. We also have Rhaegal recovering on Dragonstone. 3 dragons, an entire host behind them. That's not easily undone. Unless they truly have... They lingered a little longer, letting the dragons roam, though the creatures mostly drank from the stream and snapped at any unwary bird that came too close. A few watchers on horseback patrolled the perimeter, ensuring no troublemakers got near the dragons. When Daenerys and Jon finally turned back for the city, a sense of uneasy equilibrium settled over them. They had dragons, watchers, allies, but the seeds of larger conflicts were taking root, hidden in the shadows. That evening, they convened a smaller meeting with Tyrion, Grey Worm, Tormund, fresh from an afternoon recon in the countryside, and the newly arrived Iron Bank envoy, Reginald Hather. The location was a refurbished chamber in the keep's southwestern wing, where a large fireplace crackled, warding off the damp chill. Torchlight played off the rough stone walls, and a single window looked onto the city's flickering lanterns. Dressed in travel-stained furs, Tormund lounged in a chair too small for his broad frame. Grey Worm stood at attention beside Daenerys. Tyrion, seated with his leg propped on a low stool, frowned at the Iron Bank envoy, who waited politely for their attention. Daenerys opened the meeting. "We've weighed your offer, Master Hather. The realm indeed needs coin. The gold Tyrion recovered from the Westerlands is enough for a few months, but not enough to rebuild the city and keep watchers paid for long. We want to hear your final terms." Hather bowed slightly, smoothing his immaculate black doublet. "Of course, Your Grace. The Iron Bank stands ready to loan the crown a sum that would cover your watchers, partial reconstruction, and the wages of any essential retinues for at least a year. In return, we expect repayment with interest at a rate of 8% annually. Additionally, we ask for partial collateral in the form of revenues from the Crownlands trade. 10% of the harbor taxes for 5 years, or until the loan is repaid in full, whichever comes first." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. 10% is steep. Combined with 8% interest, that's a heavy burden. Could we reduce the collateral or the interest? Hather gave a thin smile. 7% interest in exchange for 15% of harbor taxes might be possible. We remain flexible, though we must protect our investment. Keep in mind the Iron Bank sees this as a risk, given the realm's recent turmoil. Tormund snorted. "You southern folk sure love complicated deals. In the free folks' view, if a man owes another man something, they settle it face to face. This doesn't feel right. Feels like a trap." Hather's smile remained fixed. "We prefer to think of it as prudent. The Iron Bank stands neutral in politics. We support stable regimes who can repay debts. King's Landing rebuilding benefits us all. If you prefer no loan, that is your prerogative. Though I suspect your watchers would appreciate timely wages. Daenerys pursed her lips. We might find alternative solutions in time, but time is not a luxury we have. If we falter in paying watchers or rebuilding enough that trade flows freely, we risk deeper unrest. She glanced at Jon. What do you think? Jon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We can't tax the city more heavily or we'll spark riots. 10 or 15% of harbor taxes is significant, but perhaps better than raising new levies on the small folk. If the difference is paying watchers or letting them go unpaid, we risk losing control of the coasts. That's an open door for Euron or any pirate. I dislike the Iron Bank's grip, but we may have no choice. Tyrion rubbed his chin. If we accept a moderate loan, say the standard sum at 8% interest with 10% of harbor revenues as collateral, could we repay early, thus reducing the total interest? Hather nodded. Of course, early repayment lowers your overall burden. The Iron Bank welcomes swift settlements. If you find more gold in the Westerlands or an alternate source of income, you could pay us back ahead of schedule. Daenerys sighed, feeling cornered. We do this for the good of the realm. We will not become the Iron Bank's puppet, though. Let it be understood that if you meddle in our politics or try to undermine our rule, we'll default and close our ports to Braavosi ships. Hather's expression remained polite. We meddle only insofar as ensuring we'll be repaid. Rest assured, we have no desire to unseat a stable monarchy. We lost enough when Cersei Lannister failed to honor her debts. The Iron Bank invests carefully. A hush fell, the fire crackling. Finally, Daenerys nodded. Very well. We'll draft the terms at 10% of harbor taxes for up to 5 years, 8% interest on the principal. We'll repay earlier if possible. Master Tyrion, you'll oversee the details with Ser Ryman and the city's treasurers. Tyrion nodded, though his expression was resigned. I'll do so, Your Grace. Hather bowed deeply, satisfaction glinting in his eyes. Excellent. Shall we meet tomorrow to finalize the documents? I'll have my scribes prepare them. Daenerys dismissed him with a curt nod, and he departed. In the quiet that followed, Tormund let out a loud exhale. I don't like it. Feels like taking a leech onto your skin, hoping it doesn't suck too much blood. But what do I know? Jon gave him a faint smile. You know enough. But we can't hold the realm together without coin. Not in the shape it's in. Daenerys turned to Tyrion. Let's see how quickly we can pay this back once we restore trade. If we can keep peace and open the roads, merchants will come. The city will revive. Then we rid ourselves of this debt. Tyrion flexed his leg with a grimace. Agreed. If we discover more hidden stashes in the Westerlands or if the realm prospers, we can settle our debt early. Meanwhile, we do our best not to let the Iron Bank's presence shape our policies unduly. Grey Worm, who had been silent, now stepped forward. With the Watchers funded, we can maintain patrols. But the men tire of searching for hidden rebels. We might consider a targeted campaign in the Westerlands. If we show we can quell Lannister loyalists quickly, that might deter others from supporting them. Daenerys recalled the runed blades. We must be certain we can defeat them if we engage. Their dark forging might be more dangerous than standard steel. Tyrion barely escaped. We could send a strong force, but also we can't leave King's Landing undefended. Jon's brow furrowed. What if we dispatch a loyal commander like Brienne of Tarth or someone with a proven track record? She's in the north now, isn't she? Or Ser Bronn, though I'm not sure if he's wholly trustworthy. We do have some capable knights among the Vale men. Tyrion shifted uncomfortably. Bronn has a castle now near Stokeworth. He's amenable to coin, but trusting him with such a campaign might be risky. Brienne is up north, overseeing certain aspects of Sansa's guard. We could recall her, though it might take weeks for her to arrive. Alternatively, we have a few knights from the Reach who served well in the Great War. Ser Garland Hunt, for instance. Loyal enough. Skilled. Daenerys filed the name away. We'll weigh our options. Perhaps wait until we see if Euron or these rebels attempt to provoke us further. An ill-planned incursion into the Westerlands might spark a general uprising among the Lannister holdouts. Tormund coughed. I'm itching for a good fight, personally. Sitting around dealing with all this coin talk is not my style. But if you need me to lead a band, I can do so. Northmen and free folk can handle these runic blade fools. Or we die trying, yeah. Jon gave him a wry grin. We won't throw your life away. We'll consider it, though. A smaller infiltration to gather intel might be best. Not a full-scale war. Tormund shrugged. Fair enough. I'll be ready if you call. At that, Daenerys dismissed the meeting. They drifted to their respective duties. Tyrion limped off with the help of a guard. Grey Worm went to check the watchers, and Tormund left to find ale. Daenerys and Jon lingered in the chamber, the fire's glow dancing across the damp stone walls. She turned to him, voice low. We have so many fronts to guard. At times, I feel as though we're playing an endless game. We push one threat down, another rises. We sign a loan, we discover a new rebel cell. We soothe the Dornish, the Lannisters snarl. Meanwhile, the grander threat from Essos might loom. Jon's gaze was empathetic. We can't fix it all at once. The realm was shattered long before we arrived. We've at least replaced open tyranny with an attempt at justice. Let that be enough for now. If we keep moving, we'll get there eventually. She managed to smile. Yes, you're right. One step at a time. They parted soon after, each off to their own duties before nightfall. Daenerys found herself walking the keep's corridors, nodding at guards, occasionally stopping to offer words of encouragement to exhausted workers. More than once, she glimpsed the battered city through arrow-slit windows. The flicker of lanterns and torches formed a patchwork of small bright spots against the gloom. She took a moment to reflect. Was this progress? At least the city's fires were not from dragonflame or catapults. No major riots festered at this moment. A fragile calm, but calm all the same. Several more days passed in this uneasy stasis. Then, on a windy afternoon, word came that Lady Nymella's guard had awakened. Daenerys and Jon hastened to the maester's chambers, accompanied by Lady Nymella and a single Dornish retainer. A watchful cluster of Unsullied guarded the corridor. Inside, the room smelled of medicinal herbs and stale sweat. The wounded man lay propped up by pillows, his brow beaded with perspiration. He looked around with wide, disoriented eyes. The maester, a gentle-voiced older man, beckoned them to speak quietly. Be brief, your graces, the maester murmured. He's weak, but he can respond to questions. Lady Nymella rushed to the bedside, though she kept her voice low. Gavin, can you hear me? The guard, a wiry fellow with short, dark hair, blinked. My lady, he croaked. I remember an attack. A man with a lion badge, he stabbed me. Then everything went black. His gaze wavered to Daenerys and Jon. Your graces, he managed with a faint attempt at a bow from the bed. Daenerys stepped closer, speaking softly. We're glad you survived. We intend to hold your attacker accountable. Can you tell us precisely what happened that day? Did he speak any words that might help us in judging his guilt? Gavin coughed. Lady Nymella helped him sip water from a cup. After a few moments, he rasped. I was with 2 other Dornish men in the courtyard. That man, he wore old Lannister colors, started shouting at us. Said we had no right to walk around as if we owned the city. Called us traitors for aligning with Targaryens. I told him to hold his tongue. Then he pulled a dagger. He lunged at me, screaming something about avenging his queen. I tried to dodge, but he trailed off, wincing as though the memory pained him more than the wound. Jon nodded gravely. That lines up with Watcher's testimony. He was the aggressor. Lady Nymella's eyes flashed with anger. He tried to kill a Dornish envoy for no reason but bigotry and misguided loyalty. He must die. Daenerys looked at the guard, whose eyes fluttered with exhaustion. Thank you, Gavin. Rest now. You've done enough. She gestured for the maester to continue caring for him, then motioned for Lady Nymella, Jon, and the rest to retreat into the hallway. Once there, Daenerys folded her arms. That's confirmation enough. He openly declared his motive. The Watchers heard him. Gavin's testimony aligns. We can proceed with the trial. Jon, I'd like it done quickly. Tomorrow. Let the city see that an attack on an envoy is a grave crime. Lady Nymella's voice was cold. Yes, I expect a swift execution. Jon raised a hand. The city should see some semblance of due process. We hold a brief hearing tomorrow. Present the evidence. He'll have a chance to speak, though likely it won't change anything. Then the sentence. That way, no one can claim we executed him in secret. Daenerys nodded. Agreed. Make the arrangements. Grey Worm can see the prisoner is brought to the courtyard under guard. Tyrion can officiate with us if he's well enough to stand. Let Lady Nymella witness. We'll put an end to this business. Nymella gave a curt nod, satisfied. She stepped away, likely heading to her quarters to inform her delegation. Daenerys sighed, meeting Jon's gaze. Another matter nearly resolved. Let's hope it provides a warning to any who plan to murder envoys in the future. Jon's eyes were grim. We'll see. Hate dies hard. But at least we can show the realm that we won't tolerate violence against diplomatic guests. They parted ways. That evening, Daenerys found herself once more in the War Council chamber with Grey Worm, Tormund, and a few knights, finalizing details of the trial. Everything was set. A simple dais in the courtyard, Watchers surrounding it, the City Watch invited to observe. They hoped it would deter further trouble. The next day dawned with scattered clouds, the sun peeking through slivers of light. In the main courtyard, workers had cleared debris and placed benches for onlookers. The dais, made of hastily hammered planks, stood at the far end, near a newly reinforced section of wall. Unsullied lined the perimeter, silent in their ranks. A small crowd gathered, city folk curious to see justice done, Dornish delegates wanting closure, a few minor lords who chanced to be in the city. Whispers spread. The monarchy was about to pass sentence on a Lannister loyalist. Daenerys and Jon arrived in their ceremonial black cloaks, accompanied by Grey Worm and Tyrion, who walked with a cane, though he tried to hide any sign of pain. Lady Nymella and two of her men stood near the dais. A hush fell. Then the guards dragged the prisoner forward, wrists manacled, face bruised from days in the cells. He still wore ragged remnants of a lion sigil tunic, though much of it was torn away. He glared at the assembled with defiance. Daenerys studied him. A lean man of middle age, a trace of hatred gleaming in his eyes. Tyrion spoke first, clearing his throat. We are gathered so that the crown may judge a man who attacked an envoy from Dorne, seriously wounding him. The monarchy has heard the evidence, including Watcher's statements and the victim's own words. The charge is attempted murder of a diplomatic guest, an act of treason and malice. The penalty is death, unless there be some exculpatory argument. The prisoner spat on the ground. Spare me your fancy words. I did what any loyal man would do. Defend my queen's legacy against Dornish scum. The Targaryens destroyed her, toppled House Lannister. And you, Lannister, he glowered at Tyrion. You're a traitor to your own blood. Tyrion kept his face impassive. I serve the realm, not a mad queen who refused to keep her vows to fight the dead. Jon's voice carried quietly over the courtyard. You took it upon yourself to knife an envoy. That is murder, not loyalty. Your queen is gone, undone by her own cruelty. The realm has moved on. The man sneered. You say that, but we remain. There are many of us who remember the lion's glory. One day we'll cast you out. Euron Greyjoy or someone else will lead us. A murmur went through the crowd. Daenerys raised her hand to still them, then addressed the prisoner directly. You have condemned yourself with your own words. You carried out a violent attack on a guest of the crown. For that crime, you forfeit your life. The prisoner's nostrils flared. I kneel to no usurper. Do it then. No one spoke for a moment. Then Daenerys turned to Lady Nymella. We promise Dorne justice. The crown will administer it. Witness, so you know we do not shy from our duty. Nymella gave a sharp nod. She stared icily at the prisoner. Grey Worm stepped forward, unsheathing a short, curved blade. Tormund, standing in the crowd, watched with folded arms, expression grim. Tyrion set a hand on his cane, preparing to step aside. The hush thickened. Jon suddenly said, "Wait." All eyes turned to him. He studied the prisoner for a moment. Then, stepping off the dais, he drew Longclaw from its scabbard. The courtyard stirred in confusion. Jon moved to stand beside Grey Worm. He glanced at Daenerys, who seemed puzzled. Jon spoke in a low voice that still carried. He swore he'd never kneel to Targaryens or give up his hatred. Let him face the king's justice directly. Daenerys understood. In the north, execution was often carried out by the one who passed the sentence. She let out a breath. "Very well," she said. "Proceed." Jon turned to the prisoner. "Any last words?" The man locked eyes with Jon, defiant to the end. "Only curses for you and your black beast. May the old gods, the new gods, all gods curse you for smashing House Lannister's rightful rule." Jon's jaw set. "So be it." He raised Longclaw. In one swift motion, he brought the Valyrian steel down, severing the prisoner's head with a clean stroke. Blood splattered the muddy ground, drawing gasps from the crowd. The head fell to the side, eyes still open in shock. The body crumpled. Jon exhaled, stepping back, the blade dripping red. A hush gripped the courtyard. After a moment, Daenerys lifted her voice. "Let it be known, we do not kill for vengeance or pleasure, but no one attacks an envoy of the crown and lives. If you have grievances, bring them peacefully. We will listen, but violence begets violence, and we will answer it with the law." Lady Nymella's features were stony, but she inclined her head in acknowledgement. The crowd began to disperse, some looking shaken, others grimly approving. Tyrion closed his eyes, swallowing the memory of so many past executions. Grey Worm wiped his blade on a cloth. Tormund took in a breath, as though remembering the savage justice of the far north. Jon handed Longclaw to a guard to be cleaned, then climbed back onto the dais. Daenerys met his gaze. "It's done," she murmured. He nodded, expression numb. "Let's hope it deters more attacks." The courtyard cleared, with only a few workers left behind to remove the corpse. Daenerys and Jon returned inside. Lady Nymella followed, quietly thanking them for swift action. She would remain in King's Landing until her guard could travel, but now she had closure. Or so she said, though her eyes lingered on the spot where the man's head had rolled, as if haunted by how easily men resorted to violence. In the corridor, Daenerys leaned against the damp stone. Another day in a realm that can't seem to let old grudges die. Jon turned to her, wiping a speck of blood from his sleeve. "It was necessary. The city needed to see that we protect envoys. We can't let these small fires spread." She nodded, though her stomach churned at the memory of the beheading. She had witnessed many executions, had administered them herself, and yet it never grew easier. If it did, she feared she would lose her humanity. Jon's drawn expression suggested he felt the same. Just then, the distant sound of hoofbeats clattered in the courtyard beyond, echoing off the walls. A guardsman hustled down the hallway, breathless. "Your Graces," he blurted. "A messenger from the Rose Road arrived. He claims the Watchers near a main crossroad discovered bodies. Caravan guards from the Reach, slaughtered, swords with runes found at the site. Possibly the same forging that wounded Lord Tyrion. They beg your presence." Jon cursed under his breath. Daenerys felt her pulse jump. Another sign of these runic weapons, no doubt tied to Euron's forces or Lannister rebels who possessed them. She squared her shoulders. "Show us where. We'll ride out if needed, or at least dispatch someone." Grey Worm, who had been trailing them, stepped forward. "Let me prepare a contingent. I can investigate, or if you wish to go in person." Daenerys hesitated. The last time Tyrion had confronted these runic-armed enemies, he nearly died. Did she want to risk her life or Jon's on a roadside ambush? Yet sending a lesser commander might yield few answers. Then again, she could bring a dragon, but that might risk a confrontation they were not prepared to handle. The image of runes biting into Umbrax's or Drogon's scales unnerved her. Jon placed a gentle hand on her arm. Let's gather more details first. We'll talk to the messenger, see how urgent this is. We might only need a skilled group to confirm the threat. But ignoring it would be unwise. She gave a tight nod. Yes, summon the messenger to the War Council room immediately. Within half an hour, they reconvened in the War Council chamber. Daenerys, Jon, Grey Worm, Tormund, and the messenger. A wiry man with dust-caked boots and an anxious demeanor. He introduced himself as Sergeant Lyle Thorne of the Watchers on the Rose Road. His face pinched with worry as he recounted the grim discovery. "It was early this morning, Your Graces," he said, voice trembling. "We found a small caravan from the Reach, grain merchants mostly, lying broken by the roadside about 20 leagues southwest of King's Landing. Horses gone, men slain, at least a dozen bodies. Some had deep slashes that glowed faintly, as though the wounds were burned in. We recovered 2 swords dropped in the mud, covered with swirling runes. The men who did this vanished, but we saw footprints heading west." Daenerys's stomach churned. Another brutal attack, presumably by the same faction. "You said the wounds glowed faintly. Are you sure?" Sergeant Thorne swallowed. "I saw it with my own eyes. Maybe it was a trick of the morning light, but the flesh around the cuts looked scorched, almost blackened with runic shapes, like a brand." Tormund let out a low whistle. "That's not normal steel. Not even Valyrian steel does that. More of that black magic forging. I'd wager." Grey Worm's features hardened. "I can lead a force to track them. The Watchers might catch them before they regroup. We have to do something. This is near the main route from the Reach, crucial for bringing grain here. If caravans fear to travel, the city starves." Daenerys and Jon exchanged grim looks. The city relied on the Reach's harvest to survive winter. If runic-armed raiders prowled the road, commerce would halt. Another angle of sabotage. Jon asked the sergeant, "Did you see any sign of Euron Greyjoy or men wearing Greyjoy insignia? Or Lannister banners?" The man shook his head. "No direct sign, but some of the Watchers who arrived earlier said they heard laughter, deep voices in the night, speaking about the storm and our Golden Lord. Could be Euron's men or Lannister loyalists. Hard to say." "Golden Storm," Daenerys murmured, recalling Tyrion's mention of that name. "He said the men he fought in the Westerlands served a golden storm. Perhaps that's how they style Euron or another leader. We must assume they're organized, not random brigands." Jon exhaled. "Yes, they may intend to choke off trade routes, 'cause panic. This can't stand." "Grey Worm, how soon can you leave with a contingent?" Grey Worm stood straighter. "By dawn tomorrow we can have 100 unsullied plus Watchers. That should be enough to handle a band of raiders. But if their runes are potent, we must be cautious. We lost men to the Night King's undead. This might be similarly dangerous." Tormund smirked. "Danger is the free folk's middle name. Let me go, too. My lads and I can track across open country. Sniff them out. If they're small in number, we corner them. If they're big, we'll see how big." Daenerys liked the idea of Tormund's free folk scouting. They had proven adept at stealth and movement in rough terrain. But she worried about the risk. "I appreciate your willingness, Tormund, but remember, if they hold strong sorcery, we can't be reckless." Tormund laughed. "I'll keep that in mind, my queen. I'm not eager to get myself burned by runes. I'll take caution." Jon turned to Daenerys. "Should we accompany them ourselves? A show of force with a dragon might deter these raiders. But if we confront them and it turns into a pitched battle with unknown magic, it's a risk." She considered carefully. "We can hold back at a distance with Drogon or Umbrax. We'd see the battlefield, intervene if needed, but let Grey Worm and Tormund lead the initial approach. If it's a large force or they use arcane weapons, we can unleash dragonfire from the sky. If it's a small group, the Unsullied and Free Folk can handle it." Jon nodded, relief flickering in his eyes. "That's wise. We won't leave the city undefended. Tyrion remains here with Watchers. plus some garrison. But a demonstration of our readiness to protect trade might help quell the city's worry. And if these men truly are part of Euron's circle, capturing or destroying them could yield valuable intel. Daenerys agreed. Yes, we'll plan to ride out tomorrow morning. Grey Worm, gather your men, plus Torments. We'll meet at the north gate at first light. Sergeant Thorne, you'll guide us to the site of the attack. The man bowed. I will, your grace. My watchers remain there, guarding the scene. Grey Worm saluted. We'll be ready. Tormund grinned, eyes alight with the prospect of action. A good scrap beats sitting around. Daenerys dismissed them to make preparations. She and Jon lingered, the flicker of torches dancing on the walls. Outside, the wind moaned, rattling shutters. A sense of foreboding gnawed at Daenerys. This would be their first direct clash with the rumored runic-armed rebels. She prayed it would not spiral into something worse. Jon set a hand on her shoulder. We'll handle this carefully. We can't let fear drive us into mistakes. If it's only a small band, we'll end them swiftly. If it's more, we'll retreat and regroup. She placed her hand over his. Yes, we've faced worse, haven't we? He gave a quiet, reassuring nod. They parted to finalize plans, each weighed down by the memory of how even small conflicts could spark devastation in Westeros. But their choice was made, no more letting these runic marauders roam free. Tomorrow they would ride, and if the fight found them, they'd meet it with steel and fire. Dawn broke with an iron-gray sky, clouds hanging low. The courtyard bustled as unsullied formed ranks. Tormund's free folk milled about, and a handful of standard cavalry prepared to ride out. Daenerys and Jon emerged in leathers and cloaks, mounted on fine war horses. Drogon and Umbrax were not to be ridden from the city itself. They would depart from the fields north. So Daenerys planned to ride a horse until they cleared the gates, then summon Drogon. Jon would do the same for Umbrax or call him at need. Tyrion, leaning on his cane, approached them. All set to chase ghosts and runes, I see. Good luck. I'll keep the city from imploding in your absence. Daenerys offered a small smile. We'll try not to be gone long. If anything urgent arises, send a raven to the watchers along the Rose Road. We'll return if needed. Tyrion nodded. Understood. Also, keep an eye out for any sign of Euron. If he truly leads these men, capturing one alive might yield crucial answers. We need to know how far this conspiracy goes. Jon agreed. We'll do our best. Stay safe here. If Lady Nymella's guard recovers enough to travel, let her depart with our blessings. We can't keep her here indefinitely. Tyrion waved them off. Yes, yes. Go before the day's half gone. The gates opened, squealing. Outside, the plain stretched under shifting skies. The column moved out. 40 unsullied in neat ranks, a score of free folk with Tormund, and a handful of mounted knights. Daenerys and Jon rode at the front, flanked by Grey Worm. Sergeant Thorne guided them, eager to lead them to the ambush site. They trotted on at a steady pace, traveling a well-trod section of the Rose Road. Sparse farmsteads passed on either side, fields partially fallow, the occasional peasant watching warily from a doorway. The earlier storms had turned the road muddy, so progress was not swift. An hour into the journey, they diverted off the main road to join a smaller track that led north. There, they found a broad meadow where Umbrax and Drogon waited, guarded by watchers. The two dragons nestled amid tall grass, their enormous forms rising like living mountains of scale. At sight of Daenerys, Drogon lifted his head with a resonant rumble. Umbrax's serpentine neck craned around, golden eyes narrowing in recognition of Jon. A hush fell among the unsullied and free folk, as it always did when confronted with living dragons. Daenerys dismounted. We'll take them from here. Sergeant Thorne, lead the column along the track. Tormund, Grey Worm, keep scouting ahead. Jon and I will circle above and see if we spot anything suspicious. They nodded. Tormund's grin was huge, though his men looked a bit wary. Daenerys climbed onto Drogon's back, feeling the familiar warmth of his scales beneath her gloved hands. The black dragon let out a gusty snort, vibrating through her bones. She turned to see Jon mounting Umbrax, the bigger beast snorting columns of hot breath that melted the dew on the grass. Grey Worm formed up the column, ensuring the formation was tight. Sergeant Thorne took the lead, pointing westward. With a powerful thrust of hind legs, Drogon launched into the sky, wings creating a thunderous downdraft. Umbrax followed, overshadowing the column below. Daenerys relished the rush of air, the sense of power in Drogon's muscles. They climbed higher, scanning farmland and rolling hills, patches of woodland. From above, the Rose Road was a thin line cutting across the land. The smaller path branched off, meandering toward a distant ridge. Jon guided Umbrax beside Drogon, both dragons letting out echoing roars. Fields of crops rippled beneath them. Horses in distant paddocks stampeded in fright at the draconic silhouettes overhead. Daenerys spotted the traveling column, little more than dots on the muddy track. Over the next hour, they soared in a wide arc, searching for signs of trouble or large camps. Nothing obvious appeared, just a few smoke plumes from isolated farmsteads. Eventually, Daenerys guided Drogon back down, landing near a bend in the track where the Watchers had halted. The force parted to make room as Drogon's claws dug furrows in the mud. Umbrax landed with a heavier impact behind them, scattering lumps of earth. People shielded their faces from the debris. Sergeant Thorne trotted up on horseback, face ruddy from the damp wind. "We're about 3 miles from the site, Your Grace. My Watchers remain posted there. We can approach quietly if you prefer." Daenerys nodded. "Yes, quietly. We'll keep the dragons at a slight distance so as not to spook any potential survivors or Watchers. If you see signs of enemies, signal us. We'll come swiftly." They advanced with caution. The terrain grew more wooded, the track hemmed in by birches and pines. Mud and puddles forced the horses to pick their steps carefully. Tormund's free folk spread out on the flanks, bows and spears ready. The Unsullied maintained a central column. Every rustle of leaves set nerves on edge. At last, they reached a small clearing where a cluster of Watchers stood vigil near the remains of the ambushed caravan. It was a grim sight. Wrecked wagons, broken crates of grain scattered in the mud. Crows perched on the bodies of slain men, pecking at decaying flesh. The Watchers had covered some of the corpses with rough cloth. The stench hung thick in the damp air. Grey Worm signaled for the column to halt. Daenerys, now dismounted from Drogon, moved carefully among the wreckage. Jon followed, Umbrax looming just out of the clearing, hidden behind the treeline. The Watchers greeted them with a salute, then pointed to a makeshift pile of items they had collected. Among them were 2 swords, their blades etched with swirling runes resembling dark, twisted script. A faint discoloration along the steel hinted at some malevolent forging. Jon knelt, studying one blade. "Looks like the same style Tyrion encountered," he said, voice tight. "The runes almost shimmer if you tilt it in the light." Daenerys stood over him, arms folded. "We'll take them back for further examination, but best we keep them wrapped. I don't want them to wound another." She looked around. "Any sign of survivors? Or footprints leading away?" One of the Watchers, a stout woman with a scratched cheek, spoke up. "We found footprints heading deeper into those woods, westward. At least 6 men. Maybe more. No survivors from the caravan. They were all cut down or shot with arrows. We suspect the attackers carried off anything valuable besides the grain." Grey Worm looked to Daenerys. "We should pursue them. If they're still near, we can catch them." Jon nodded. "Agreed. Let me and Tormund's trackers lead the way. The rest can follow at a short distance. If we find them, we strike." Daenerys realized she should remain with the dragons. If things escalated, she could provide air support. "Go. Be careful. If the Watchers confirm it's a small group, you can handle them. If it's large or if there's heavy sorcery, signal me with a horn blast, and I'll bring Drogon and Umbrax." Jon met her gaze. "Be ready. We don't know what we'll find." She pressed her lips into a line. "I will. May the gods or fate watch over you." We end this quickly if we can. Jon squeezed her hand briefly, then turned to Tormund, who gave a wolfish grin. All right, Crow, let's see what we find. He motioned to his free folk, who melted into the undergrowth with practiced skill. Grey Worm directed a smaller group of Unsullied to follow at a cautious distance, while the main column remained behind to secure the site. Daenerys stood with Drogon nearby, the dragon's tail swishing restlessly. Umbrax was half concealed in the thick trees, only visible by the faint glint of his black scales. Sergeant Thorne and a few watchers fanned out around the clearing, scanning for any stray threat. The air smelled of pine and rot. Time seemed to slow, her nerves taut as she waited for a sign. A horn blast, a shout, anything to indicate what Jon and Tormund encountered. Minutes dragged on. The watchers busied themselves removing valuables from the wrecked wagons. Grey Worm paced, hand on sword hilt. Daenerys tried to quell the swirl of tension in her gut. If these runic-armed men were near, they might be prepared for an ambush. At last, muffled shouting echoed from deeper in the woods. A horn note blasted, one short, sharp tone that carried through the trees. Daenerys's pulse kicked. She looked at Grey Worm. One blast, maybe they found them, or they're calling for support. Grey Worm barked an order. The Unsullied readied shields and spears. Daenerys vaulted onto Drogon's back, feeling the dragon tense beneath her. Check Umbrax, she called to a nearby watcher. But Umbrax seemed already aware something was happening. The black dragon emerged from the treeline, scraping bark, golden eyes intense. Daenerys nudged Drogon upward. The dragon took flight with a roar that shook branches loose. Umbrax followed, overshadowing the clearing. They rose above the canopy, scanning for movement. Daenerys caught sight of a swirling scuffle about a quarter-mile west, where the trees parted into a smaller glade. Figures clashed in the open. Tormund's free folk, Unsullied, and a handful of other men in battered leather or black cloaks. It was impossible to tell who was who from the distance, but she saw glints of steel, the flash of runic weapons, and the strobe-like flicker of something glowing red. She urged Drogon forward, heart hammering. Umbrax soared behind, Jon presumably guiding him. They swooped lower, glimpsing the fight through the canopy. Tormund's big shape was visible, swinging an axe. Unsullied moved in tight formation. Their opponents wore no obvious banner, but Daenerys spotted a swirl of golden lines on one man's cloak. Two others had swords that glowed with runic script. The men fought with frenzied aggression, as if half-mad. She heard war cries, the clang of steel. One of Tormund's men fell, cut across the chest by a runic blade. A sense of fury ignited in Daenerys. She steered Drogon into a dive, unleashing a short burst of flame into a patch of open ground away from friendlies, just enough to warn the enemy. The roar of dragonfire splashed across the dirt, causing men to scramble. The runic-armed foes tried to scatter beneath the trees for cover. Jon circled overhead on Umbrax, scanning for a safe angle. With a roar that shook leaves from the canopy, Umbrax spat a concentrated blast of black-tinged flame into a cluster of the enemy who had darted behind a fallen log. Screams erupted as at least one man was caught in the blast. But another, armed with a glowing sword, rolled clear, shouting defiance. Below, Tormund howled, "Get them, you scum-eating cowards!" He charged at a pair of foes, axe raised. Grey Worm, leading a half-circle of Unsullied, pinned two men with spears. Blood slicked the grass. A flash of runic steel clashed with an Unsullied shield, leaving scorch marks on the metal. The man behind it grunted, forced back by unnatural heat. Daenerys saw an opening. A group of 3 runic fighters retreating into thicker woods. She guided Drogon overhead, dropping low enough that her vantage parted the canopy. "Dracarys," she commanded. Drogon exhaled a narrower jet of flame, carefully aiming at the line of retreat. The men scattered. 2 dove behind a boulder, the third tried to sprint left. One was caught in the edge of the fire, shrieking as his cloak ignited. The other 2 stumbled away, clothes smoking. Umbrax roared from the opposite side, a thunderous challenge. Jon steered the black dragon down, raking the ground with massive claws, but the terrain was thick with trees, limiting a direct pounce. One runic swordsman frantically slashed at Umbrax's foreleg, the blade sparking against scales. Umbrax bellowed, shifting back, though his scales appeared unbroken. The man gave a defiant snarl, until a free folk spear impaled him from behind. Bit by bit, the attackers were cornered or cut down. One or two tried to flee deeper into the woods. Tormund's men gave chase. Grey Worm's formation advanced relentlessly. Daenerys kept Drogon aloft, ready to drop more flame if needed, though friendly forces had scattered across the glade. She didn't want to risk friendly fire. Moments later, the clash ended with the last of the runic-armed men lying dead or pinned under a spear. One man survived, though severely wounded. Tormund stood over him, battered but grinning triumphantly. Blood streaked his red beard. The captive glared around with feverish eyes, a runic dagger clenched in one trembling hand, blocked by Tormund's boot. Daenerys landed Drogon carefully in the glade, flattening a patch of brush. Jon followed on Umbrax, the colossal dragon towering. The survivors among the Watchers and free folk formed a circle, panting, weapons dripping. Grey Worms unsullied took stock, verifying which men had fallen. Daenerys dismounted, heart thudding. She spotted at least 3 dead or wounded unsullied, another 2 free folk moaning on the ground, and several battered Watchers. The enemy corpses numbered close to a dozen, each bearing some sign of runic forging, whether a sword, dagger, or talisman. The last living foe, pinned by Tormund, spat at Daenerys' approach. "You, it's you," the man hissed, voice ragged. "The Dragon Queen, and the Black Rider. You can't stop the Golden Storm. This is only the beginning." Jon slid down from Umbrax, stepping near. "We've heard that name. Who is the Golden Storm?" "Euron Greyjoy," the man cackled, blood flecking his lips. "He who will unite the old powers. He who will bring the new dawn of storms and gold. All Westeros will kneel or burn." He coughed, sinking lower. "Kill me. I serve him until my last breath." Daenerys knelt, ignoring the stench of blood. "Tell us more or face a painful death. We want information." He grinned, madness shining in his eyes. "You have no idea the power he wields. He's forging a pact across the seas. Soon, your dragons will feed the flames that grant him immortality. We are nothing but vanguards. You cannot stand against what is coming." Tormund pressed his axe closer to the man's throat. "Stop your riddles. Speak plainly." The man's breath rattled, each word labored. "Volantis, Sithorios, the smoking sea, he stirs them all. We gather, we rise. The black dragon's blood is the key." He coughed violently, blood pouring from his mouth. Something like a spasm seized him. Then he slumped, eyes going blank, dagger slipping from his grasp. Daenerys cursed softly. The man had died before giving more specifics. His final words repeated in her mind. "The black dragon's blood is the key. Umbrax, or perhaps Jon's Targaryen lineage, or something else." Jon stepped closer, face grim. He confirmed an alliance across the sea. Possibly Euron, possibly a broader cult. This is worse than scattered rebels. Grey Worm knelt to check the man's pulse, then shook his head. "He's gone, but we have this runic dagger." He lifted it carefully, a twisted shape etched with vile symbols. Even in the dim light, it seemed to shimmer. Daenerys looked around at the battered survivors. "Gather the wounded. We can't stay here. We'll send a few Watchers to search the area for any hidden camp. The rest must return to King's Landing with the prisoners, though we only have one prisoner and he's dead. Or do we have any other living foe?" Tormund spat on the ground, wiping blood from his beard. "We took down most. One might have fled. My men tried to chase, but they lost him in the trees. If he got away, he won't last long alone. But he might carry word back to whoever commands them." Daenerys suppressed a shudder. Another piece of a larger puzzle. Dark alliances, runic forging, talk of harnessing Umbrax's power. She moved among the ranks, checking casualties. The Watchers had lost 2 men, the Unsullied 3. A free folk archer was missing an arm. The cost was high for a handful of these cult-like raiders. If Euron commanded hundreds or thousands, it spelled a terrifying threat. Jon looked at her, voice subdued. We'd best report this to Tyrion, to the entire council. Lady Nemella might want to hear it too. Dorne could be next if these raiders spread. And the Red Priestess's warnings, they may be proven true. She nodded, gazing at the runic weapons littered among the dead. Each one felt like a shard of some ancient darkness. Yes, let's gather what we can, then return. The city needs to know we dealt with these killers, but also that more might lurk in the west or beyond. They set to work. The glade reeked of death, but they managed to collect the runic blades, wrapping them in thick cloth to avoid accidental cuts. Grey Worm assigned a detail to bury the crown's dead or bring them back for proper rites. Tormund cursed the odd scalding marks left by the runes on a free folk's shield. Sergeant Thorne and the Watchers recovered a few tokens from the enemy. Gold ribbons embroidered with swirling designs, small icons carved from obsidian-like stone. When they finished, the force turned around. Daenerys and Jon mounted their dragons to fly overhead once again. Tormund, Grey Worm, and the battered survivors marched below. The sense of victory was hollow. They had eliminated a small cell but uncovered proof of something bigger, a golden storm that might span oceans. They arrived at King's Landing by late afternoon, shadows stretching. The city gates opened to admit them, but an anxious hush fell among the populace who saw the returning soldiers, some carrying litters with wounded. Blood-stained armor told the story of a brutal fight. Daenerys guided Drogon to land outside the keep, letting the Unsullied carry their fallen within. Jon and Umbrax settled nearby, Watchers giving the monstrous black dragon a wide berth. Tyrion appeared in the courtyard, cane in hand, face troubled at the sight of casualties. Daenerys dismounted, exhaustion heavy in her limbs, and approached him. Jon joined them. Tyrion spoke first. "It seems you met them. Are we safe?" Daenerys related the gist of the battle. Runic weapons, the mention of a golden storm, the harrowing confirmation that Euron or some other figure was forging alliances with black sorcery. Tyrion listened in mounting alarm. Grey Worm, stepping up, displayed one of the cloth-wrapped swords for Tyrion's inspection, carefully pulling back a corner to reveal the swirling runes. Tyrion winced at the sight, gingerly letting the cloth fall back. "And the man's final words," Jon repeated. "Volantis, Sithorios. The black dragon's blood is the key. That's all we know." Tyrion stared at the runic blade. "Gods, this surpasses normal warfare. If they're forging alliances as far as Volantis, they might have coin, ships, men, plus unnatural weapons. We can't handle that with scattered Watchers." He glanced at Daenerys, voice subdued. "We might need alliances of our own. Dorne, the Reach, the Vale, a united Westeros. Otherwise, these dark powers could whittle us down." Daenerys inhaled sharply. "Agreed. We'll convene a great council as soon as we can. Let the lords gather here or at Harrenhal, somewhere we can discuss a defense. If the realm must stand as one, then so be it." She gestured at the battered men behind them. "Look at the cost of just a handful of these runic fighters. If a large force arrives, or if Euron sails with a fleet of them, Westeros would bleed." Tyrion nodded. "We'll send ravens at once. Sansa, Gendry, Yara, the Vale, the Riverlands, Dorne, everyone. We'll see who answers. Let's hope it's not too late. And in the meantime, we must remain vigilant. If they strike the Rose Road once, they can do it again or shift to the Gold Road or the north. We need better coverage on the roads." Grey Worm saluted. "We'll tighten patrols. The Watchers know how to proceed. Our men are tired, but we'll rotate." Tormund scratched his head. "A big council might help, but I never liked stuffy lords in one room. They bicker more than crows. Still, if you say so, we'll see how it goes." Daenerys allowed herself a weary laugh. "Yes, they do bicker, but we must unify the realm, Tormund, for a threat that could overshadow us all." Jon gazed at Umbrax, who loomed behind them, swishing his tail. "We'll keep the dragons close. If these cultists want Umbrax, we'll not give them an opening. We might relocate him and Drogon to the keep's outer courtyard again, at least temporarily. Or keep them in flight often." Daenerys touched his arm. "We will do whatever it takes. The realm must not fall to a new doom. We ended the White Walkers. We can end this." Jon nodded, though anxiety pinched his face. "Yes, if we stand together, maybe we can. We have to try." They stood in the courtyard's fading light, the battered soldiers dispersing, the runic blades carefully taken to a locked storeroom. Beyond the walls, King's Landing's hum continued, oblivious to the scale of menace rising. Daenerys closed her eyes briefly, recalling the swirl of prophecies, Bran's warnings, the Red Priestess's talk of monstrous conspiracies.